When reading through the Princeton Essential Guide to Goethe, you come across his selected poems, of which one, Hegira, is dated 1814. It is a poem which marks the phase in Goethe's life where he would again look east, beyond the traditional confines of the Greco-Roman tradition. He had done so earlier in his life, having penned a poem, Mohammed's Gesang. Mohammed sang. And it was now, around 1814, during his period of Romanticism, that he devoted his attention to the literature and history of Persia. Hegira is part of the West-Östlicher Divan. He had obtained, earlier in 1814, a German translation of the Persian poet Hafez's Divan in 2 volumes from the publisher Goethe of Stuttgart. The translator was the Austrian orientalist Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall. His continued fascination with getting to grips with the Ottoman and Persian empires and cultures of the East agrees with Goethe's character of one who had an insatiable appetite for consuming all the knowledge of the world, including a particular fancy upon the great civilizations of the past. This meant not finishing at the boundaries of the Mediterranean or at the Bosphorus Strait, but heading into Asia and heading into civilization's cradle. Goethe had already gone on the traditional Italian journey in the 1780s, some 30 years earlier, and had written a collection called Roman Elegies, or Römische Elegien, which was published in 1795. In it we see much of his frustration that he found when confronted with the ruins of Rome, deigning for them to speak to him, to inspire some poetry into his pen. Goethe, forever in these selected poetry parts of Princeton, portraying a man frustrated by the inhibitions of the human soul, wrote the following lines, inspired by his journey into the heart of the classical capital. Deign to speak to me, stones, you high palaces, deign to address me, streets, now say but one word. Genius, will you not stir? True, all is living, yet within your sanctified precincts, timeless Rome, only me, all still and silent, receives. Oh, who will whisper to me? At what small window revealing her, the dear one whose glance, searing, will quicken my blood? Can I not, on what roads, forever coming and going, only for her sake I'll spend all my invaluable time? Still, I'm seeing the sights, the churches, the ruins, the columns, as a serious man ought to, and does use his days. That, however, will pass, and soon no more than one temple, Amor's temple alone, claim this insatiate's zeal. Saget, Steine mir an, o sprecht ihr hohlen Paläste. Straßen, redet ein Wort. Genius, regst du dich nicht? Ja, es ist alles beseelt, in deinen heiligen Mauern, ewiger Rome. Nur mir schweiget noch alles so still. O wer flüstert mir zu? An welchem Fenster erblick ich einst das holde Geschöpf, das mich versengen erquickt? Ahn ich die Wege noch nicht, durch die ich immer und immer zu ihr und von ihr zu gehen, opfer die kostliche Zeit. Noch betrach ich Kirch und Palast, Ruinen und Säulen, wie ein bedächtiger Mann schicklich die Reise benutzt. Doch bald ist es vorbei. Dann wird ein einziger Tempel, Amors Tempel nur sein, der den Geweihten empfängt. Eine Welt, zwar bist du, o Rom, doch ohne die Liebe. Wäre die Welt nicht die Welt, wäre denn Rom auch nicht Rom. Rome, you remain a whole world, but without love the whole world would always be less than the world. Neither would Rome still be Rome. This, the first of Goethe's Roman Elegies, portrays the strange contemplation that occurred to him in the heart of antiquity. The classical world enveloped him not with the serious spiritual manner which it seemed to have invoked in his predecessor Winckelmann, but with rather an overly aesthetic and sensual, pagan overcoming. And he had spent much of his times involved in an intense physical, emotional response to his surroundings. His love of the artistic heritage of Italy combined with a physical passion for his mistress, Christiane Vulpius. So with the Italian journey leaving a hole in Goethe's want for antiquated spirituosity, he had no choice but to continue to look east. And when, in those early months of 1814, when Napoleon was facing his denouement, Goethe looked across the expanse of the Tigris and the Euphrates and into the Iranian plateau for a poetical mind that could touch with his. He found this in the poet Hafez, who he called Hafez. Hafez, literally meaning the memorizer or safekeeper, was a Persian poet who had lived in the 14th century and had experienced the turmoil that land had gone through during the expanse of the conqueror Tamerlane. Tamerlane, or Timur, was the last of the great Asian conquerors from the steppe, a king by right of purest conquest against an overly sensual and decadent world. He viewed Hafez's experience in this Persian 14th century much like his own at the turn of the 19th. Germany had been subjugated by Napoleon. The ancient Holy Roman Empire carved up and disbanded into the Confederacy of the Rhine, only then for Napoleon now to be looking at a great fall. Thus he viewed the parallels between Tamerlane and Napoleon, and between the poet Hafez and himself. His earlier infatuation with Mohammedanism gave him the springboard to realize that there was a solemnity and spirituosity that could be invoked from the Arabian desert that could fill the gap that he didn't find in pagan Italy. This is the earnestness under the stars that Thomas Carlyle speaks of in his Life of Muhammad. Here are the lines from the Princeton Essential Guide translation of the Hijra 1814 by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. North and west and south are breaking, thrones are bursting, kingdoms shaking. Flee then to the essential east, where on patriarchs' air you'll feast, there to love and drink and sing, drawing youth from Khizr's spring. Pure and righteous, there I'll trace, to its source the human race, prime of nations went to each, heavenly truth in earthly speech. Still by God himself was given, human brains not racked and riven, when they honoured ancestors. To strange doctrine closed their doors, youthful bounds shall be my pride, my thought narrow, my faith wide. And I'll find the token word, dear because a spoken word. Mix with goatherds in dry places, seek refreshments in oases. When with caravans I fare, coffee shawls and musk my wear, every road and path explore, desert cities and seashore. Dangerous track through rock and scree, Hafez, there you'll comfort me. When the guide enchanted tells, on the mule's back your gazelles, sings them for the stars to hear, robber bands to quail with fear. Holy Hafez, you in all baths and taverns I'll recall. When the loved one lifts her veil, ambergris her locks exhale, more the poet's love song must melt the houris, move their lust. Now should you begrudge them this, even long to spoil such bliss, poet's words, I'd have you know, round the gate of Eden flow, gently knocking without rest, everlasting life, their quest. Hafez himself had passed into Persian myth. Many semi-miraculous tales are attributed to him from this 14th century. The fact he had memorized the Quran from a young age. At 60 he underwent the Chiranashini, a 40-day night and vigil, sitting in a circle, drawn under the stars, where he undercame a cosmic consciousness, one that seemed to haunt Goethe, as he could not attain it himself. He had spoken in the courts of Tamerlane, just as Napoleon had come to visit Goethe himself, when conquering past the Elbe, some years earlier. And he had a deep love for Jacques Nabat, who inspired his romantic edge, which would have appealed to a Goethe of the song Sorrows of Young Werther, a Goethe wanting to find a broader acceptance in the East of his pagan sensuosity. Goethe's expanse East pried open an interest which would radiate down the 19th century and beyond. Carlyle took up to write his hero as prophet on Muhammad. Shelley wrote The Revolt of Islam, taking a different tact than Goethe, envisioning an Enlightenment-style reform in the Islamic world. That want to explore East also overcame Byron, and who was to say, if he had not, this swimmer of the Hellespont, died out there in Greece, would he not have continued on, further and further like Alexander? And finally we come to Spengler himself, whose realization of parallels between Alexander and Napoleon mirror the realization that Goethe felt that Hafez had undergone through Tamerlane, a similar experience as the poet of the Napoleonic Wars. In John Darwin's After Tamerlane, he realized that this great Timur, written by Marlowe to spring forth Faustian conquering culture, was a demarcation of the last of the old worlds, the last time an unknown prowess could spring from the heart of the steppe. But for the poet in the turn of the 19th century, for a Goethe, that prowess of poetry could still be found and unearthed.